Tene, Tacherdo, Gampopa, Sumpetanga Tela, Chu Ye Benane, Tana, Shoking, Hadru, Chutin Tela, Tene, Chu Ye Nane, Tangpo.
From among the four Dharmas of Lord Gampopa, during this morning's session, we looked at the first, which is the mind going to the Dharma. And I explained the methods and instructions which we use in order to bring this about. The second of the four Dharmas is called Dharma becoming a path. Now, in any case, when someone has faith in Dharma, devotion for Dharma, and practices it, they're very fortunate. This is very good. But whether the Dharma they practice becomes an authentic path or not depends upon their motivation. And motivation can vary. For example, there are two types of motivation we could have for our practice of Dharma that are regarded as inappropriate. One of these is called the seeking of temporary protection. The other one is called the aspiration for temporary excellence or temporary benefit. The first of these, the seeking of temporary protection, is when your practice of Dharma is dedicated to the alleviation of some present adversity, such as physical sickness or mental suffering or some other adverse condition. Now, this is not utterly wrong in the sense that the sources of refuge to whom you are going for refuge are authentic and reliable. The problem is that the intention behind your practice is so small, so limited, that it is insufficient to serve as a basis for your Dharma becoming an authentic path. The other type of inferior motivation is the aspiration or hope for the temporary excellence or temporary benefit. And this is when you practice Dharma in order to achieve a state of happiness or comfort in this life, or in order to achieve a comfortable rebirth, such as a human or deva, in future lives. Now, this is an indirect cause of liberation because the Dharma you are practicing is authentic, but it is not and cannot be a direct cause because of the inferiority of the motivation. So in either of these cases, Dharma is not really becoming a path. In order for Dharma to become a path, we need to be motivated by the wish to achieve a state of liberation from all three realms of samsara and the state of omniscience or awakening. If our motivation and practice is the desire to achieve some state of happiness or comfort within samsara, that motivation must be discarded, must be changed. So we need to develop that renunciation for samsara, which culminates in the thought, I am practicing so that I may achieve liberation and omniscience. Now, this motivation as well can have two varieties. And while both are authentic, they differ greatly in scope. These different motivations characterize what are called the lesser and greater vehicles. In the practice of the lesser vehicle, one's practice is devoted to one's own achievement of liberation from samsara, including all the sufferings of the lower states and so forth. One practices Dharma for that reason alone. In that one is motivated by stable renunciation for samsara, one's motivation is good. But nevertheless, in comparison to the motivation of the greater vehicle, your motivation is still inferior and still is not going to be a cause of the greatest benefit. It, therefore, too, must be changed. What then is the superior or supreme motivation that we need? It is the motivation that is born from the understanding that not only are you suffering in samsara, and therefore not only do you want to free yourself from the sufferings of samsara, but that all other sentient beings are suffering in samsara just as you are, and therefore the wish to establish them in that same freedom from samsara. The reason for this motivation is that all sentient beings without exception want to be happy, want not to suffer. There is no sentient being anywhere that actually wishes to suffer, wishes to avoid happiness. However, some sentient beings are unable to accomplish causes of happiness or to recognize them as such. Some sentient beings are unable to abandon causes of suffering or to recognize them as such. In our aspiration to remove the suffering of sentient beings, we have to accept that we cannot immediately remove all of their sufferings directly, as these sufferings come from causes, karma, kleshas, and so forth. But if we have the long-term intention to liberate all beings without exception, through the power of that intention and the ensuing aspiration, we will eventually have the opportunity to benefit these beings. Now, this intention, this motivation, is what is called bodhicitta, and is the supreme motivation which is characteristic of the Mahayana. In order that it be correctly ascertained, it's necessary to understand that bodhicitta has two aspects. One aspect is compassion, focused on sentient beings, and the other aspect is discernment, focused on perfect awakening. Compassion focused on sentient beings means that your intention, your motivation, is the wish to protect and benefit and remove the sufferings of all beings without exception. Discernment, focused on perfect awakening, means that this altruistic benevolence, this wish to protect all beings, is not limited to some temporary benefit, such as the wish to feed all beings or clothe all beings and so on. All of these things, of course, help, but they are not the ultimate benefit for beings. On the other hand, if you establish beings in Dharma, they will gradually achieve liberation and eventually perfect awakening, which is the ultimate benefit. So therefore, the benefit you aspire to bring sentient beings is the ultimate benefit of perfect awakening. This motivation, endowed with compassion and discernment in this way, is that bodhicitta which causes the Dharma you practice to become an excellent and fully authentic path. Now, the first two motivations I mentioned, the wish for temporary protection and the wish for a temporary improvement or excellence, do not cause the Dharma you practice to become an authentic path. The third motivation, the motivation of the lesser vehicle, does indeed cause the Dharma to become an authentic path, but one that is somewhat limited in scope. Therefore, the motivation that we require, the motivation that causes the Dharma to become a path in the fullest sense, is the motivation of bodhicitta, characteristic of the Mahayana.
Tene ta tela acherdo ngaranso chu jeade kalchemborella chu jeade kalchembo imbala tambu kulho yapuje kalchembore.
Dharma practice is important, but the motivation with which that practice is done is equally important, because your initial motivation is going to determine the result of your practice. It is therefore of great importance that your motivation be bodhicitta. In detail, there are two motivations. There is the initial or causal motivation and the immediate motivation. The causal or initial motivation is your fundamental or initial intention in doing something. You think, I am doing such and such thing to achieve such and such purpose. This is true whether we are talking about Dharma or a mundane action. You have a fundamental or causal motivation for doing the thing to begin with. The second type of motivation, immediate motivation, is the actual motivation that is present in your mind while you are doing the thing. And this may not necessarily be the same as your causal motivation. There are four possibilities with regard to these two motivations in the practice of Dharma. One possibility is you could have a pure causal motivation, but your immediate motivation could become impure. Or you could have an impure causal motivation, but your immediate motivation could become pure. Or you could have a pure causal motivation and a pure immediate motivation, or you could have an impure causal motivation and an impure immediate motivation. Ideally, for the best and purest practice of Dharma, we need both a pure causal motivation of bodhicitta and a pure immediate motivation as well. But if your initial or causal motivation is somehow impure, you can still make sure that your immediate motivation is impure by consciously generating bodhicitta. In any case, by being motivated by bodhicitta, your Dharma becomes a path. Now, when we generate bodhicitta or bring bodhicitta to mind, sometimes we do so in a fabricated or artificial way, and sometimes we do so in an unfabricated or natural way. Sometimes we don't need to fabricate bodhicitta, we actually feel it. But at other times, because we are ordinary sentient beings, we sometimes do not feel it, and therefore we have to consciously remind ourselves, even though in a sense we are telling ourselves to have this motivation, and this is therefore fabricated, it will reinforce the motivation of bodhicitta and lead to unfabricated bodhicitta. Therefore, in order that Dharma become a path, we need the special motivation of bodhicitta. In general, there are two types of bodhicitta, what we call relative bodhicitta and what we call absolute or ultimate bodhicitta. The one of these that is the most important at this stage of ensuring that Dharma become a path is relative bodhicitta. According to the Sumatran Dharmakirti, it is principally through the practice of relative bodhicitta that we ensure that our Dharma become a path. And we do so by actually taking our fixation on the self onto the path. This is pointed out because in general we regard the substance of the path as, at least in part, meditation on emptiness and the realization of selflessness. But here, in forming our motivation, we act as though the imputed self truly exists. We act as though selves exist, as though beings truly exist, as they appear to in relative truth. We take the attitude that all of these beings are truly suffering, that they truly wish to be free of their suffering. And through bringing this to mind and feeling it intensely, we cultivate the strong wish and determination to alleviate their suffering. This is very different from meditation on emptiness or selflessness, but nevertheless, this practice of relative bodhicitta is the source of the greatest benefit.
Tene ta te tabu tene chonchu kusam jikom cheparje jilla jewala tene ngaran so kamni.
In order that an authentic motivation of bodhicitta arise in us, we need to familiarize ourselves with it or to become accustomed to it. One of the principal means of doing so is the practice of the taking and sending of misery or suffering and happiness, respectively, which is an instruction that comes from the Mahayana mind training tradition. The instruction begins, practice taking and sending in alternation. One does so by thinking that one takes into oneself and away from all others all of the suffering and causes of suffering that afflict all other sentient beings, and that one gives to all of those beings all of one's happiness and all causes of happiness that abide within one. The reason for doing this meditation is that the principal impediment to our generation of bodhicitta is self-cherishing, the beginningless habit of thinking, I must at all costs be happy. Now, there are other means of abandoning self-cherishing. These include meditation on selflessness and so forth. But here, the means employed is overpowering or reversing that self-cherishing by replacing it with the cherishing of others and cultivating an attitude of cherishing others so that that becomes far more powerful and far more intense than one's cherishing of oneself. So we cultivate this in meditation by practicing taking and sending. You imagine all beings present in front of you, and you think that you take from them all of their suffering and give them all of your happiness. This is done as a means of abandoning your self-cherishing. In particular, the instructions of the siddhas has been to coordinate this with the breathing, so that as you breathe in, you think that you remove from all beings and breathe into yourself all of their suffering and its causes. And as you breathe out, you think that you give to all beings all of your happiness and its causes. And these are the instructions of the Sumatran teacher Dharmakirti.
Tene ta te tabu gambu kapsala ya tene ngaranso kapkala njito lo jegi yore njito che undu tela ta tende gamna.
Sometimes fear arises in the practice of taking and sending. Some people wonder, if I meditate like this, maybe all of my happiness and virtue will be lost. Maybe lots of suffering and adversity will occur for me. Sometimes when people who are practicing taking and sending become uncomfortable or ill, they suspect that it's this meditation which is causing it. In fact, this is not true. Happiness and suffering arise from one's previous actions. You cannot actually breathe in another sentient being's suffering or breathe out your happiness and give it to them. You can't take beings suffering away from them in this way. You can't catch beings suffering or its causes. Well, then you might object, well, if happiness and suffering arise from one's previous karma, and we cannot in fact take beings suffering away from them and give them our happiness, then what is the point in doing this practice? This practice has great meaning, but we do not do this practice of taking and sending so that we can literally give beings our happiness and take from them their suffering. We do it in order to reduce our cherishing, our self-cherishing, and in order to increase our cherishing of or our concern for others. Because through doing this, we cause bodhicitta to gradually develop in our minds. Therefore, we need to practice taking and sending repeatedly, because through this practice, as our self-cherishing diminishes and our concern for others increases, so will our bodhicitta. As well, while we do not benefit beings immediately by breathing in their suffering and breathing out our happiness, we do benefit beings through this practice. We benefit them because what we are cultivating in this practice, through cultivating the concern for and cherishing of others, is the wish to be of benefit to others. And through this wish and its ensuing aspiration, we will gain the ability to actually benefit them.
Tene ta te tardo shene jamjin ji songju ji sen kone kon te pelu ke tap je ta tene te jim de ya janju sen dambalengi yore la.
The practice of taking and sending is one method through which we can cultivate and increase love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Another means for doing this is the taking of the bodhisattva vow. The bodhisattva vow is taken repeatedly. It may be taken in the presence of a preceptor, or in the presence of a support, or in the visualized presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But in any case, there is great benefit in receiving the vow and in renewing it, taking it repeatedly. Now, with regard to the Bodhisattva vow, some people feel some fear. They think, well, if I take the Bodhisattva vow, I will still be unable to emulate the great deeds of Bodhisattvas. Surely I will break the vow because I'm still going to get angry, generate afflictions like pride and jealousy, and so on. In fact, this is not regarded as dangerous. We take the Bodhisattva vow repeatedly in part for this reason. And furthermore, the nature of the vow is understood differently from external vows, such as the pratimoksha. A pratimoksha vow is fundamentally concerned with or fundamentally governs actions of body and speech. Since we can control our bodies and speech, when you take a pratimoksha vow, you take it with the intention to keep it exactly as stated. But the bodhisattva vow is fundamentally a vow of mind, and we cannot control our minds as well as we can control our bodies and speech. So therefore, even in the words of the bodhisattva vow itself, we find an understanding or acknowledgement that the vow is somewhat different. We say, I will gradually train in these stages. We don't say, I will do all of this 100% perfectly from today onward. So, although we do, in a sense, contravene the vow from time to time, if we honestly and repeatedly admit this and resolve to improve, then the bodhicitta that the bodhisattva vow has produced within us will increase. In that way, the bodhisattva vow is the second method by means of which bodhicitta is cultivated and Dharma is caused to become a path. In the context of the jewel ornament of liberation, the principal means taught for Dharma becoming a path is this vow itself.
In that
way, these two methods, the practice of the instructions of Mahayana mind training and the taking of the bodhisattva vow, are means of generating bodhicitta. Whether we actually generate bodhicitta or we are attempting to bring about its generation, in either case, these are the means by which Dharma becomes a path. Principally, Lord Gampopa taught the motivation of bodhicitta itself as how Dharma becomes a path. In addition to that, his followers have taught the practice of the uncommon preliminaries as important in this context, such as the repetition of the vow of refuge and accompanied by prostrations, the repetition of the 100-syllable mantra in order to purify wrongdoing and obscurations, the gathering of the accumulation of merit and wisdom through the offering of a mandala, and the receiving of the Guru's blessing through the practice of Guru Yoga. According to Jomgon Kongtrul Rinpoche, it's necessary that anything we want to develop in our minds be reflected upon repeatedly, all the time. So therefore, it's important to recollect bodhicitta not only during meditation sessions, but also between sessions, to recollect bodhicitta itself repeatedly, and also to recollect its qualities. This is excellent. In particular, Jomgon Kongtrul Rinpoche wrote, the practice of the taking and sending of suffering and happiness at the time of one's death, coordinated with one's breathing, is probably the most profound instruction for dying that exists. If, as one breathes and as one approaches one's death, one thinks, I give all of my happiness and all of my virtue to sentient beings, and I take all of their sufferings and its causes into myself, then while there are many other profound instructions for going through the dying process, it would be very hard, he wrote, to find one as profound as this. If one dies in a state of such consummate benevolence, then this same attitude, this same motivation, will naturally arise when one is in the bardo, or interval between lives. Furthermore, one will not forget this motivation or attitude in one's subsequent birth. This will have great benefit. It will lessen the bewilderment of the bardo and remove the possibility of unfortunate births. And also, it will cause the momentum of this motivation, the momentum of love, compassion, and bodhicitta, to arise strongly in one's subsequent life and, by extension, in all future lives. This is therefore considered the best instruction for the time of death.
Chuntin Tezom, Shona, Chenamba Kanga Peto, no Chimbu, Chusemba Tuji.
So in that way, the second Dharma of the four is Dharma becoming a path, phrased as Lord Gampopa's aspiration. Grant your blessing that for myself and all sentient beings, Dharma become a path. I thank all of you for listening enthusiastically, and we're going to stop for this afternoon here.